They weren't kings, they weren't emperors, but they carried swords that changed the world. From deserts to empires, these men of faith fought with courage so fierce that history itself trembled before them. These are the warriors of Islam, the heroes who never lost a single battle. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe so you never miss these untold chapters of our history. And tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know how far these stories are reaching. They were men no different from their neighbors. Some tended sheep beneath the harsh Arabian sun. Some traded in the markets of Mecca. Others lived lives unnoticed, destined to pass through history like grains of sand in the desert wind. But when the message of Islam entered their hearts, an unseen transformation took hold. The Quran breathed into them a new vision, a mission beyond the fleeting desires of this world. They were no longer simple men chasing wealth, status, or survival. They became soldiers of conviction, guardians of truth, and warriors whose strength was measured not in muscle or steel, but in their unshakable faith in Allah. For them, the battlefield was not a place of fear, but of clarity. To fight was not to seek conquest for themselves, nor to bathe in glory. It was to defend the words that had reshaped their lives, to protect the revelation that promised them something greater than the treasures of kings. Paradise was not a story. It was a certainty, a reality waiting beyond the veil of death. With every step they took into the dust and blood of battle, they carried the promise of Jannah in their hearts. That certainty gave them a courage that baffled their enemies and inspired their allies. Imagine standing on a barren plain, your army small, weary, and outnumbered. In the distance stretches a sea of soldiers, their banners high, their armor gleaming, their voices echoing with confidence. By every rule of war, you should turn back. By every measure of reason, defeat should already be written. Yet these men tightened their grips on their swords, raised their voices in remembrance of Allah, and marched forward. To them, the size of the enemy mattered little. They knew what others could not see, that victory does not come from numbers, nor from weapons, but from the will of Allah. It was this conviction that made Khalid ibn al-Walid charge into armies many times the size of his own and emerge victorious, that pushed Salahuddin to reclaim Jerusalem with mercy, that carried Tariq ibn Ziyad across the sea to open the gates of Andalusia. They fought as if angels stood at their shoulders, for in their hearts they knew that martyrdom was not defeat, but triumph, that every wound, every sacrifice, every drop of blood spilled for the sake of Allah was a step closer to eternal gardens beneath which rivers flow. Their enemies could not understand it. They saw warriors who did not fear death, who smiled in the face of overwhelming odds, who fought with discipline born not of training but of devotion. Armies crumbled before them not only because of their strategies, but because they faced men who had already given their lives to Allah before they even set foot on the battlefield. Thus, ordinary men became legends. The desert gave birth to conquerors who never sought thrones, who did not chase the titles of kings. They sought only the pleasure of their Lord. And on the battlefields where history expected them to be crushed, they carved a legacy that endures to this day, proof that with faith, even the smallest army can stand undefeated against the greatest of empires. He once rode into battle with the sole purpose of extinguishing Islam. At Uhud, Khalid ibn al-Walid commanded the cavalry that nearly turned the tide against the Muslims. His name was feared, his skill on the battlefield undeniable. Yet destiny had written something greater for him than the sword of an enemy. When the truth of Islam reached his heart, when he saw that this message could not be broken by force, Khalid laid down his pride and embraced the faith he once opposed. It was a moment that changed history. The same man who had brought fear to the Muslims now became their shield, their general, and their undefeated sword. From the day of his conversion, Khalid carried Islam on his shoulders with a loyalty that never wavered. His brilliance was not only in strength but in strategy, in the ability to see the battlefield like a chessboard where every move mattered. At Mu'tah, Facing an enemy said to number in the hundreds of thousands, he took command after the fall of the Muslim leaders. Outnumbered beyond imagination, he maneuvered his men with such precision that they escaped annihilation. What should have been a massacre became a victory of survival, and it was there that Khalid earned the trust of the ummah. His legacy reached its height at Yarmouk, a battle that shook the foundations of the Byzantine Empire. The Muslims were fewer, poorer, and seemingly weaker, yet under Khalid's command, they became a force of unstoppable momentum. He shifted divisions with lightning speed, used the terrain to his advantage, and inspired his soldiers with unshakable confidence. When dust filled the sky and the earth trembled under the clash of armies, it was Khalid's genius that turned chaos into triumph. Yarmouk was not only a victory, it was the moment an empire crumbled before the faith of men who feared only Allah. But it was not strategy alone that made Khalid immortal in the pages of history. It was the recognition he received from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself. After Mu'tah, the messenger of Allah declared, "You are a sword from the swords of Allah, and you have been unsheathed against the disbelievers." From that day, Khalid was known as Sayf Allah al-Maslul, the drawn sword of Allah. It was not a title of pride, but of destiny, for he fought not for himself, but as a weapon in the hand of divine will. Khalid ibn al-Walid never lost a single battle. Dozens of campaigns, countless enemies, yet never once did defeat touch his name. And when his life came to an end, he wept not for loss, but for longing. "I fought in so many battles, yet here I die on my bed like a camel," he lamented. His body bore the scars of more than 100 wounds, yet not one had claimed his life. To the end, he remained the sword of Allah, a reminder that faith can turn an enemy into the greatest defender, and that courage, guided by belief, can shape the destiny of nations. He did not begin his life as a king or an heir to a great empire. Salahuddin al-Ayyūbī was the son of a humble Kurdish family, raised not in palaces but in camps, learning discipline, humility, and service. His early years were marked by loyalty to his master, Nur al-Din Zengi, under whose guidance he grew from a young servant into a man of purpose. What set him apart was not merely his skill with the sword, but his devotion to justice, his commitment to uniting the fractured Muslim lands, and his vision of an ummah standing strong against the Crusaders. From the shadows of obedience he rose into the light of leadership, and his name would one day make kings tremble. The Crusaders saw him first as another regional commander, a passing obstacle in their grasp on Jerusalem. But Salahuddin carried within him a fire that no one could see until it was too late. He consolidated Egypt, secured Syria, and patiently prepared for a confrontation that would decide the future of the Holy Land. His armies were disciplined, his strategies meticulous, but his strength lay deeper, in the belief that he was not merely fighting for land, but for the sanctity of Al-Quds, for the honor of the ummah, for the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That conviction came to its peak at the Battle of Hattin in 1187. On the scorching plains near the Sea of Galilee, Salahuddin faced the Crusader armies who had once marched across the Muslim world with arrogance. He cut off their water supplies, encircled their forces, and unleashed a storm of cavalry that shattered their lines. The Crusaders, exhausted and broken, were brought to their knees. It was more than a military triumph. It was the collapse of a century of foreign domination. Within months, Jerusalem itself returned to Muslim hands. Yet the true greatness of Salahuddin was not in victory, but in mercy. When the Crusaders had taken Jerusalem decades earlier, they filled its streets with blood, slaughtering thousands without remorse. But when Salahuddin entered the city, he forbade massacre. No revenge, no indiscriminate killing. Instead, he granted safe passage to the defeated, allowing Christians to leave with their lives, their families, and their dignity. Even his enemies could not deny his nobility. Richard the Lionheart, the famed English king, spoke of him not only as a formidable adversary, but as a man of honor unmatched in their age. Salahuddin al-Ayyūbī became more than a conqueror. He became a symbol of justice, mercy, and faith in action. His victories carved his name into history, but his character carved it into hearts. To this day, his story is told not only as the tale of a warrior who reclaimed Jerusalem, but of a servant of Allah who showed the world that true strength lies not in cruelty, but in mercy. And so he remains, the liberator of Al-Quds, a hero remembered not only by Muslims, but by all who value honor in the face of power. The year was 711, and the winds carried with them the weight of destiny. At the edge of the known world, a young general named Tariq ibn Ziyad stood before an outnumbered army of Muslims, their eyes fixed on the vast waters of the Mediterranean. Before them lay the powerful Visigothic kingdom of Spain, its riches and fortresses guarded by armies many times larger than their own. Behind them, only the sea. Tariq had been entrusted with a mission few thought possible, to carry the banner of Islam into Europe, to plant faith where it had never yet reached. With courage burning in his chest, Tariq led his men across the treacherous strait that now bears his name, Jabal Tariq, Gibraltar. When their ships reached the shore, he ordered something that would echo through the centuries. He commanded that the vessels be set aflame. As the fire devoured the wood, his soldiers watched in shock. Their path of retreat had been erased, their only road now forward. Then Tariq raised his voice, delivering a speech that ignited their souls. Behind you is the sea, before you the enemy. You have nothing left but your swords and your courage. By Allah, victory will be ours, for paradise lies ahead, and death is the only barrier between us and eternal reward. His words thundered through their hearts, transforming fear into resolve. What followed was one of the most daring campaigns in history. With barely 12,000 men, Tariq faced the Visigothic king Roderick and his massive army. The disparity was staggering, yet the Muslims fought with faith that outweighed their numbers. The battle raged, and Tariq's leadership shone through every maneuver, every strike. The Visigothic forces collapsed under the pressure of men who had already accepted martyrdom, who carried no burden of retreat or hesitation. Victory was theirs, and Spain lay open before them. From that day, Andalusia would become a jewel of the Muslim world. Cities flourished with knowledge, science, and culture. The gates that Tariq opened would usher in centuries of civilization that lit the darkness of Europe. Cordoba, Granada, Seville, names that would echo as centers of wisdom, architecture, and faith. The world changed because one man chose to burn the ships, to strip away the comfort of turning back, and to embrace destiny with unshakable faith. Tariq ibn Ziyad was not born into greatness. He did not inherit power or wealth. Yet he proved that conviction in Allah can transform small numbers into unstoppable legions. His fire did not only consume wood, it consumed doubt, hesitation, and fear. And through that blaze, a new chapter of history was written, one where the flame of Andalusia illuminated not just the Muslims, but the whole of mankind. He was known for his sharp mind long before he ever commanded an army. Amr ibn al-As carried with him the wit of a diplomat and the instincts of a warrior, a man who could read the hearts of men as easily as others read the lines of a book. Before embracing Islam, his cunning had been used to serve the old order, but once faith entered his heart, it became a weapon for truth. He was not remembered for sheer strength, but for strategy, for the ability to turn impossible odds into victory, and for leading with precision where brute force would have failed. When the gaze of the Muslim ummah turned toward Egypt, it was Amr who was entrusted with the mission. The land of the Nile was vast, fertile, and coveted by empires, yet under Byzantine control it had been drained of its spirit, its people weary under foreign rule. With only a modest army, Amr marched across the sands, his men carrying little more than their swords and their faith. Every step forward was a test against legions that outnumbered them, yet his strategies made the enemy stumble at every turn. He used speed where they relied on weight, precision where they trusted in size. The key to his conquest was not slaughter, but wisdom. When he reached the fortress of Babylon near modern-day Cairo, the walls loomed high and the defenders were determined. A long, bloody siege might have been expected, but Umar chose patience and negotiation. He fought when he had to, striking quickly and decisively, but he also offered terms, showing mercy where others would have shown cruelty. His soldiers respected him, and even his enemies found in him a commander who balanced steel with reason. Slowly, city after city fell not in ruin but in surrender, the people preferring his rule to that of their former masters. When Alexandria finally opened its gates, it marked not only the fall of Byzantine power in Egypt, but the dawn of a new era. Through Amr's leadership, Islam spread across the Nile Valley with astonishing speed, welcomed by many who longed for justice and relief from oppression. Egypt became a beacon for the Muslim world, a center of knowledge and trade, its mosques rising where once foreign garrisons had stood. From there, the message of Islam began to flow further south, reaching into Africa. The seeds of faith that Umar planted would grow into roots stretching across the continent, carried by traders, scholars, and warriors who followed in his footsteps. His campaign was not simply a military victory. It was the opening of doors through which generations of Muslims would pass. Amr ibn al has proved that conquest does not always require rivers of blood. Sometimes it requires the steady hand of a commander who knows when to strike and when to wait, when to wield the sword and when to offer peace. His legacy endures in every prayer that rises along the Nile, in the cities that still bear the mark of his vision, and in the history of a faith that spread not by destruction, but by wisdom. Not all heroes of Islam became household names. Some lived and died without the world carving their stories into monuments. Yet their victories carried the weight of empires, and their courage shaped the destiny of nations. They were men whose lives burned brightly on the battlefield, their deeds unmatched, their records free of defeat. Among them stood Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Muhammad ibn Qasim, and Uqba ibn Nafi warriors, whose names might be whispered less often than Khalid or Salahuddin, but whose legacies are no less eternal. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas was among the earliest companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a man whose faith never wavered even when persecution pressed heavily upon the Muslims in Mecca. On the battlefield, his courage was matched only by his devotion. At Qadisiyah, one of the most decisive battles in history, he led the Muslim army against the mighty Persian Empire. The Persians were among the greatest superpowers of the age, with vast armies, elephants in their ranks, and centuries of imperial might behind them. Yet, under Sa'd's command, the Muslims stood firm. He organized his men with remarkable precision, choosing patience over haste, unity over pride. For days the battle raged, dust clouding the skies, the earth trembling beneath thousands of hooves. But when the smoke cleared, it was the banner of Islam that stood over the field. The Persian forces were broken, their empire shaken to its foundations. It was the beginning of the end for a civilization that had once dominated half the known world, and it was Sa'd's leadership that made it possible. His victory at Qadisiyah was not simply military triumph, it was the opening of Persia to Islam, the transformation of an empire by faith carried on the swords of men who refused to bow to worldly power. Decades later, another name would rise in a very different corner of the world. Not a seasoned general, but a youth, barely into manhood. Muhammad ibn Qasim was only 17 when he marched into the land of Sindh, a region that now forms part of modern-day Pakistan. Where others might have faltered with inexperience, he carried himself with the maturity of a veteran. His army was small, but his resolve was immense. With brilliant tactics and the loyalty of his men, he overcame entrenched forces, storming fortresses that had stood for centuries, and spreading Islam across the Indian subcontinent. His campaign was swift and decisive, conducted with discipline that belied his age. The young general became a legend not only for his victories, but for the justice he established in the territories he conquered. At 17, When most youths are still discovering themselves, Muhammad ibn Qasim had already secured his place in history as the conqueror of Sind, undefeated and unbroken. And then there was Uqba ibn Nafi, the rider of the western horizons. His campaigns carried him across North Africa, pushing further and further until the Atlantic Ocean itself barred his way. It is said that when his horse's hooves touched the waves, he raised his voice and cried out, "O Allah, if the sea did not stop me, I would have continued to carry your word to the ends of the earth." In that moment, he embodied the spirit of Islam's expansion, fearless, unrelenting, driven not by greed but by the mission to spread truth as far as Allah allowed. Uqba founded cities that would become centers of knowledge and trade, such as Kairouan in Tunisia, a city that still stands as a testament to his vision. His conquests carried the light of Islam across a continent, and his name remains etched in the memory of those lands, though he is often forgotten in the broader tales of history. What unites these men is not only their victories, but their record of never tasting defeat. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas shattered Persia, Muhammad ibn Qasim brought Islam to the gates of India, and Uqba ibn Nafi carried it to the shores of the Atlantic. Each of them proved that the power of faith could move armies, topple empires, and cross horizons. They were not driven by crowns or wealth, but by certainty in Allah's promise, certainty that victory and defeat lie only in His hands. Though history often elevates a few names and leaves others in the shadows, the ummah remembers. These hidden heroes, undefeated and unshaken, carved pathways through which Islam spread to millions. Their stories remind us that greatness does not always roar with fame. Sometimes it rides quietly through deserts, storms, fortresses at dawn, or declares to the sea itself that no barrier can halt the will of Allah. They may not always be spoken of in classrooms or celebrated in monuments, but their victories remain alive in every prayer whispered in Persia, every call to Salah in Sind, every mosque standing in North Africa. Their legacies are living proof that the history of Islam was written not by a few, but by many, each one a flame that carried the light forward, undefeated. They did not walk onto the battlefield with invincible armor or weapons forged by kings. What made them undefeatable was something far deeper, something no enemy could touch. It was faith unshakable, immovable, alive within their hearts. These men carried the Quran in their souls, the remembrance of Allah on their tongues, and the certainty of paradise in their eyes. Against such conviction, swords and spears were powerless. Armies that relied on numbers and wealth could not understand the strength of men who fought as though death was not an end, but a beginning. Their victories were not accidents of history. They were the result of courage that refused to bend, of sacrifice that placed the ummah above the self, of unity that bound them tighter than iron, and of a reliance on Allah so complete that even the largest empires trembled before them. They did not see themselves as conquerors but as servants, men entrusted with a duty greater than their lives. In their unity lay their strength. In their sacrifice lay their immortality. For us today, their stories are more than echoes of the past. They are mirrors reflecting what we have lost and what we must reclaim. Courage is not only found on battlefields, it is found in standing for truth when falsehood surrounds us, in resisting temptation when the world calls us to compromise. Sacrifice is not only the giving of life, but the giving of time, wealth, and comfort for the sake of Allah. Unity is not just marching in lines of war, but standing shoulder to shoulder in prayer, remembering that division is the weapon of the enemy. And reliance on Allah is not a relic of the past, but the lifeline of every believer, the knowledge that no matter the odds, victory belongs only to Him. The men we call heroes did not set out to be remembered by history. They set out to be remembered by their Lord, and yet history remembers them because they gave everything for a cause greater than themselves. Their swords have long since turned to dust, their bones buried in the earth, but their victories live on. Every mosque in Egypt whispers of Amr ibn al-Aas, Every call to prayer in Andalusia remembers Tariq ibn Ziyad. Every scholar who rose in Baghdad or Cordoba stands upon the victories of Khalid, Saad, and Salahuddin. Their lives were brief, but their legacies are eternal. They are gone, but their victories live forever. The question is, what battle will you never lose? Will it be the battle against your own desires, the struggle to keep faith alive in a world of distraction, the fight to protect truth when it is mocked, or the war against despair when the odds seem impossible? Their stories are not just to be told, they are to be lived. And just as they carried the banner of Islam with unbreakable resolve, so too must we lift our own banners, whatever field Allah has placed us in. For victory is not measured by thrones or empires, but by hearts that never surrender.